usually these are not time. You're running out of time, so move to something. ये पोस्टर दिखाने के लिए क्या بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم यहाँ का माइक्रोफोन ये किरात वालों का माइक्रोफोन है ये बयान के लिए माइक्रोफोन नहीं you got like 2 modes or something and switch it around without having to mess it up too much. It's all right. I'm just saying in the future you should have that as a switch, the bayan mode and kirat mode. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa baraka wa sallama tasliman kathiran ila yawmiddin. Amma ba'd. قال الله تعالى في القرآن المجيد والفرقان الحميد ولكن كونوا ربانيين بما كنتم تعلمون الكتاب وبما كنتم تدرسون وقال تعالى والذين جاهدوا فينا لنهدينهم سبلنا. So my session is regarding answering criticisms to Tasawwuf, and I don't want to just list criticisms here and then mention them because they may actually not be criticisms that you have in mind or that you may have even heard. And then we're just going to be opening up a can of worms for maybe no reason, wasting our time. So let me just mention a few points and then we'll just open it up to questions. And please feel free to ask whatever questions that you have, however controversial they may sound. And if we don't know, we'll say so. But most of the questions are known anyway. We've had 100 years of this, so it's already known. Firstly, just to add on just a few points. I mean, there was a totally thorough discussion by our dear friend Ustaz Abul Aliya, so I don't need to repeat much at all. And I don't want to do that. I'm just going to mention a few things because the Tasawwuf, Sufism, whatever name you want to call it, this whole practice of trying to be better believers and trying to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's essentially what it is. Just trying to be better believers and trying to reach Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the way I look at what Tasawwuf is. Fiqh is similar, except that relates more to very absolute halal and harams. And Tasawwuf just relates to how better to observe that halal and haram. So fiqh and jurisprudence, it's about this is halal, this is makruh, this is discouraged, this is reprehensible, this is absolutely mandatory and a pillar, and this one is recommended. It's better if you do it, but it's okay if you don't do it. So what does the Tasawwuf do? It just makes you do whatever is necessary or preferable in a better way, a deeper way, in a more fulfilling way. And it just makes it easier to avoid what's wrong and what's haram. So it works in tandem with all of these things. So then that was with fiqh. That's the way Tasawwuf works with jurisprudence. The way Tasawwuf works with the belief system of what we need to believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, about the hereafter, it just makes it more realistic and refined. So in Aqidah, we know that Allah is one. And that's an absolute basic Aqidah. We have to declare that Allah is one after knowing that He is one, and so on. What Tasawwuf does is it gives you the various different methodologies to really in our life recognize in practice that Allah is one and declare that. So to do tawheed all the time. When we're making dua, it sorts out our dua so that we're actually doing tawheed in our dua. We're actually implementing the tawheed in our dua. We're implementing tawheed in our salat. So it enhances the practice of it. So all Tasawwuf does is that it takes every science and it makes it deeper and more realistic and beneficial and practical. Look at ilm al-hadith, ilm al-tafsir, same thing. If you are practicing Tasawwuf as well, the the various different things to do with the adhkar and everything. If I'm getting up in the morning and doing my adhkar, if I'm doing my adhkar and I have the right idea of what tasawwuf is throughout the day, and then I study hadith, I'm going to get a lot more out of it. Because hadiths are the word of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Quran is the words of Allah. If I have just managed to open up my heart to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and become close to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam through tasawwuf, then that means I'm going to benefit more from my Quran and Sunnah. That's what tasawwuf does. Tasawwuf just adds. That's why in the hadith that was mentioned earlier, the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, there was the idea about ihsan. What is ihsan, ya Rasulullah? And the Prophet ﷺ responded by saying, it's that you worship Allah as though you see Him. You can't really see Allah. But yes, you can worship as though you see Him. As though you see Him means because Allah is part of everything, behind everything, administering everything. He's not absent anywhere. It's just that we make Him absent because we focus on other things. So if we get to this level of being able to practice tasawwuf by doing lots of dhikr and so on, then we'll actually start doing that. So that's why it's just the beautification of the faith. It's a perfection, beautification of it. It's adorning the faith. That's what tasawwuf is. Now, how is this done? Scholars throughout history have figured out ways to do this because it's different practices. Following the Sharia, avoiding the haram, that's Sharia, that you have to do that anyway. But what the ulama have figured out is that if you do this and if you do that, it'll help you observe the Sharia. So they've provided different ideas, said that if you sit and do dhikr for this long or focus on this particular type of dhikr, sitting in this particular way, that will penetrate your heart more. To do dhikr is the sunnah. They just show you how to do the dhikr. And then they just open up for us. For example, imagine this. A lot of people think that dhikr is something formal that you do. I must sit down. Let me find a clean place to sit down where nobody's going to bother me. Or if I'm traveling in a train or a bus or whatever, I'm going to take my tasbih and do dhikr. But what about when you actually start your job? You get to your job and you start working. Is there no more dhikr afterwards? Is there no more dhikr when you're eating? Is there no dhikr when you're playing? Can you not remember Allah then? Is Allah to be remembered only when you sit down to particularly do it? So for example, one of the great so-called Sufis of the past, Bahauddin Naqshbandi, came up with this idea that Dast Bakar Dil Bayar, it's a Persian term. He's from Uzbekistan, Turkic background, but Persian was the language, the lingua franca of the time. He said, what we're trying to achieve through all of this dhikr and everything is that my hand is occupied with the work. So I'm typing away, or my tongue is telling a joke. We're having a banter about something. But my heart is always with Allah. That's an amazing idea. I mean, what has the soul just done for you there? It's just brought Allah closer to you. You believed in the oneness of Allah, but now you really understand who Allah is, and you're really connecting to Allah. If you don't even know that when we're sitting down and having a little permissible banter, telling a few jokes, just reminiscing over past times, you know, when we were in school together, madrasa together, or we used to work together in the London Underground or wherever people, work. In the middle of that, you're still discussing, you're remembering Allah. He's keeping you grounded. That thought, that idea is keeping you focused so you don't go overboard. Subhanallah. And it's not just for that. It's just that you can't help but remember Allah because you made yourself so attached to Him. Imagine you've got an issue, some big issue. There's a bill that is bothering you. It's the wrong bill. They've overcharged you. And they're giving you 10 days to sort it out. You're going to be constantly worried about that. But then you get together with a few friends and you're having a little tea and discussion. You will forget for a while that bill, but then every once in a while you remember it, and it's just going to bring over something for you. you shouldn't be remembering the bill. You can be remembering the bill, but we need to be remembering Allah like that all the time. Not in this way of concern. I should have given a better example. Let's just say that there's something you know you're going to achieve very soon. It's coming. You ordered it, right? It's going to come very soon. You're very excited about it, right? You're very excited about it. It's going to take a week to come. Every now and then you're going to start remembering it. Oh, it's going to come. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. Just about thinking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like that. He said another thing. He said, Khalwat dar anjuman. That's a really interesting idea. Again, another Persian term. He said, you might be among lots of people, but you have your own solitude with Allah. It doesn't matter what people are saying. That's why the way Hassan Basri rahimahullah, he describes the earlier generation of Sahaba. He said that إِذَا جَلَسَ مَعَ الْغَافِلِينَ كُتِبَ مِنَ الذَّاكِرِينَ. These are the people with Iman, al-Mu'min. He said they are the people, if they're sitting with people who are distracted, they are going to be of the dhakir. They are going to be the ones who are still in remembrance of Allah. So you might be sitting among people playing football, watching football and getting really excited. They don't care about Allah at that point. Well, actually, I saw a clip about some Moroccan woman, I don't know, doing taweez and all sorts, the ruqya and all sorts. When Morocco was, she is doing dua and, against, I don't know what team it was. Oh, subhanallah. That's the modern Tasawwuf, I don't know what that is. Subhanallah. And then they actually won, Morocco. Subhanallah. By the way, Morocco has a lot of Sufis. If you go to Fez and Marrakesh, there's lots of khanqahs of various different tariqas. Traditionally, it's been very Sufi place until the last 1700 years when new fitna came in and tried to eradicate all of them. So that's the idea of it. He says, you're among people who are distracted, but while you may be part of that distracted state, apparently, you're remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَإِذَا جَلَسَ مَعَ الذَّاكِرِينَ كُتِبَ مِنَ الْمُسْتَغْفِرِينَ. And you're sitting among people who are remembering Allah. You're doing istighfar. You're always on a high level. Why are you doing istighfar when people are doing dhikr? So you don't show up. I'm sitting among these dhakireen. I'm there. This is the shukr of Allah that we are sitting here today. When all of these matches are going on, really it's a shukr that we're sitting here today. Try and do this program tomorrow, you see. The reason I say is I didn't know. I was supposed to do a program and it was supposed to be, I don't know when. Was it tonight? Tonight. We said, no, we can't do it tonight. We'll have to do it tomorrow. So we've shifted it to tomorrow. So, كتب من الذاكرين, كتب من المستغفرين, وهكذا كان أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم. This is exactly how the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم's companions were. الأول فالأول حتى لحقوا بالله عز وجل. One after the other until they met with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is really what Tasawwuf is. Anything wrong with that? You don't have to call it that name, but that's exactly what it is. Initially, they used to call it Zuhud. That's why you don't really hear about Sufis of the earliest generations. Nobody said to a Sahabi, he's a Sufi. Or, because it just wasn't the term used. Even the generation of the Tabi'een and Tabu'ut Tabi'een. Recently, Turath has just published Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak, rahimahullah, subhanAllah, that name is just awesome. And the person was awesome, and his, mashallah, his knowledge was awesome. His Kitab al-Zuhud. Kitab al-Zuhud. That's what it was initially referred to. All the earlier they called Zahideen. Kana Zahid. What's a Zahid? Zahid means abstinence from the world, focused on the hereafter. Doesn't mean that they lived in huts. They might have, but they didn't live in caves and didn't use anything. No, they were in the world, but their focus was the hereafter. They were not distracted individuals by the world. The main focus was that. The Sahaba were all in that sense. Some were more than others. Abu Dharr radiyallahu anhu is considered to be more than others, right? Sometimes to an extreme level, maybe. That's why the other Sahaba, they would give them fatwa sometimes. Like you can't have any more than your 1 day's sustenance. You can't have anything for tomorrow in your fridge, for example. If I'm translating his opinion correctly. That's essentially what tasawwuf is. So it was called zuhud before, usually. That's what the books are, zuhud. Then after that, it changed to love for a while. That it's about love, focus on the love of Allah. The Zahids also had love for Allah, but now it just, the whole focus became, you need to love Allah. Now, loving Allah meant obviously abstaining from haram as well, doing halal, doing dhikr, and so on. Same thing, but it's just a focus. And then after that, eventually it became known as tasawwuf, tazkiyah, ihsan, and so on. And that's the legacy we've received. That's essentially what it is. That's what it is. If you go around the whole world was Sufi. Because it was Islam, that's what it was. It's only the last 100 years, they say, that there were two blows to this. Number one, by the colonizers, especially in Turkey. Turkey was, mashallah, Sufi. In fact, until now, that's probably one of the only countries in the world where you go, they don't just ask which madhab are you, they ask which tariqa you're in. They still do, some of them. Right? Nowhere else, like they're going to say, rather, which tariqa are you in tasawwuf? They say which madhab you might be, if they're interested in that. But Turkey still has that because they've had that tradition. But then with Ataturk and also, they found that the Sufis were very well organized. Because, you have a sheikh with thousands of followers. He just has to give the command and, there you go. So they're very scared about that. Same kind of things happen in Nigeria. Much of the Islam that spread in Nigeria was through Tasawwuf. Likewise in India. Mu'inuddin Chishti rahimahullah. We don't ascribe every bit of Islam to him, but thousands, hundreds of thousands of people became Muslim at his hands. Likewise, Ahmed bin Fudi, Ahmed Dan Fodio, they call him. In Nigeria, literally it's been hundreds of thousands of people becoming Muslim on his hands. Nigeria has a lot of tasawwuf. I've been to a khanqah, for example, in Mauritania. I've been to khanqahs in the next country, Senegal. I've been to khanqahs in Morocco. I've not been to Algeria, but Tilimsan had huge amount of awliya and khanqahs there. India, Pakistan has a number of them. Medina, Munawwara, Makkah, Mukarramah, now they're all underground, but before there used to be lots of khanqahs there. Likewise in Jerusalem, people used to go there for a retreat. And let me explain to you how that comes into it. Where does this khanqah business come into it? You see, a lot of people, they say tasawwuf. So this is what they say. Tasawwuf is they're grave worshippers. That's a really big criticism, and that's a very strong criticism, and it's a very effective one. As soon as somebody gets drawn into tasawwuf, somebody's going to come along and say, Sufis, they're grave worshippers. And nobody wants to be a grave worshipper, right? That's not really something anybody wants to be, right? And the overwhelming majority of Muslims are not grave worshippers at all, right? Muslims aren't grave worshippers, but this is slur, it's a swear word, right? In fact, forget Sufis, they say Deobandis are grave worshippers. Have you ever seen a Deobandi grave worshipper? And the other person doesn't really know, so they just like, oh, okay, I don't want to be with these guys. You guys are grave worshippers. What kind of grave worship are you talking about? I've never been worshipping in the grave. It's this constant thing. It's constant. It's just totally unacademic, and it's just a swear word. Unfortunately, everybody does this kind of stuff. They just find like the worst possible swear that you can try to apply. Nobody's going to check it, right? Nobody checks the news, unless somebody tells you otherwise. This is the problem. Most people are sheep. They just listen to whatever it is. Or they're grave worshippers. Right? Quburis, right? As though, let's get, you go to a graveyard, how do you see anybody there? The poor Amwad, they'd love to somebody to come and read something, but sometimes on a Sunday you might have a few people. Yes, there are people who are Sufis who do stuff at graves, some, but the majority don't. There are some that do some dancing. There are that do some other strange things. There are a few. And Tasawwuf is very dynamic, so it is definitely open to abuse. It's definitely open to abuse. So there's definitely charlatans, imposters, degenerated ones, exotic ones, weird ones, no doubt. But the good Tasawwuf is not like that. And somebody generally asked, which tariqa is the best? that doesn't have any deviance. It's very difficult to say because unfortunately many tariqas, I'm going to say most tariqas, have the good and bad among them. It just needs a guy who was a Sufi to have messed up. He still has the connection from before the Sheikh has died, so he can't disown him anymore. And his fellow colleagues, if they try to disown him, he just calls them jealous. So that's how some evil can creep into this. That's how it is. I don't want to get into that too much, but there can be a problem like this because there's no overarching body. Like, for example, in England, if you're a lawyer, then you have to be a member of the bar. You can be thrown out of the bar and so on. There's a concept. In fact, forget law. If you're a gas safe guy, every 5 years or something, you have to go and get a new certificate, so that they just managed to get rid of all of the rogue guys who just do jobs for nothing. Do you understand what I mean? Unfortunately, there's nothing like that for Tasawwuf. That's the problem in that sense, but what are you going to do about it? So that's why we have to be careful who we find. But the benefit of that is amazing. Now, let me give you an idea of what actually happened in a khanqah. So I've been to the khanqah in Tanabawan. Tanabawan was amazing because the person who had established that originally was Haji Imdadullah and maybe somebody before him. And then he had to go to Makkah Mukarramah because of the British problems. So that khanqah, after Haji Imdadullah rahimahullah had become kind of neglected and desolate and empty, he sent one of his students, Hakim al-Mawna Shaqi, who was actually originally from there. He says, you need to go and revive that. And did he revive it? Subhanallah. That man was an individual that even today, there is a Maulana there, Maulana Hudhaifa, his name is a young man. He gives you a tour of the place and he really brings it all back for you. So he shows you the masjid, right? He shows you upstairs, that's where the rooms were. And he says, that one, Mufti Shafi Usmani used to be in that room, right? And Mufti so-and-so, all the big khulafat, that was their room and that was his room, and never they would come. And then on the side, there are two small rooms. They're called Khalwatgah. That's a Persian term, Khalwatgah, which you use in Urdu as well. Essentially, a room for solitude. It's literally the size of a grave. And that is where they would sit. Haji Imdadullah is there, and I think Hafiz Damin Shaheeds is there. And I remember I saw the original that had not been, that was amazing. But then I think it became quite bad because it's been over. So they decided to renovate it. Now it looks too new. But amazing. Literally like a space of a grave. It's a room, close the door. That's where you sit and you do your dhikr. Because the Sufis in their khanqah had certain exercises. A khanqah, they call a retreat. You can imagine it's like a clinic or a retreat that you go there for 10 days, 15 days, 20 days, 40 days, or whatever. And they give you certain adhkar to do in that time. It's like a crash course that they would give you to do. For example, at that time, Qari Tayyib, rahimahullah, who was the principal of Darul Deoband, one of the biggest madrasa in India, right? And he's the principal of that. So you can imagine where he was in the sights of everybody and his position. He went there to learn. What are you going there to learn? You're going there to learn what I said in the beginning. You're going there to learn pure tawheed, how to put it in practice. I believe this, I teach this, but how do I put it in practice? How do I get my nafs to obey? How do I get my limbs to obey? How do I get my aql and my intelligence to feel and believe in this in the way that it will now empower everything? So how do I get my intelligence, my heart, and my nafs to all be on the same page of the true believer? Very difficult to do that in the outside world because there's just too many pressures and too many distractions and attractions. That's why it's a good idea to do a retreat. Imagine sitting in a masjid for 40 days or in a khanqah for 40 days where you've got a regimen that this time you have to wake up and do dhikr. This time you have, and you only, sometimes they also minimize the food, not always. Sometimes they minimize the food because food plays a part. But they made us do struggles. That was the idea of it. So what he told Qari Tayyib Sahib to do, Hazrat Maulana Thanvi rahmatullahi alayhi, is I want you to do something very simple. Just straighten everybody's slippers. You know, maybe they didn't have these proper shoe racks at that time in that place. So they said, just straighten everybody's shoes. People just come in, their shoe, chappal, their slippers are all over the place. Just seedhi karte raho, like just straighten them. I mean, he is the principal of Darul Deoband. So, and he had a bit of refinement in him, sensitive about touching dirty stuff, as most people do. So he would only touch the nicer shoes or slippers. Maulana Thanvi saw that, and he made him do the other ones. And he said, when I did that, all the ego went from my heart. I am originally just a simple person. See, all of these things outside, a bit of money that you get, the house you may have, the job you may have, the handsomeness you may have, or whatever else that you have, it distracts us. It gives us this false sense of security, of independence. So this just brings you back to be connected to Allah. Now, when you stay there for that long and then you come out, you're just a renewed person. Then you have to carry on doing certain adhkar. It's never going to be the same as it is in a khanqah. But that's the way it was. Then I was taken from there to a distance away, where you have to, it's like 10-15 minutes walk. That was on the outskirts of the village at that time. Now they've built a big madrasa there and everything. And there was another building. He said that for some of the murids, for some of the students, patients that used to come in, jinki islah wahani hoti ko yahan bheja jata. Those who could not be reformed there in the main complex, they would be sent here for 40 days, given a small amount of food, and they just had to do certain adhkar and so on. And they couldn't meet anybody else. That just helps to just break all this attachment to the world. I don't know of any place that still does this kind of stuff, right? As much, because people can't just deal with it and there's distractions. One thing you'll have to do is take your phone away. Right? That would be absolutely necessary, because that's where a lot of the issues come. That's what they used to do. You sit and do this much adhkar. I've been to the Khanqah of Raipur, and what an amazing place it is, in the middle of some mango groves, totally serene. Like, I wish I could stay there. Like, you go there, your heart just feels a longing that I would love to be here. I was studying in Saharanpur at the time. I was in madrasa, so I couldn't be here, but you could tell that whoever, and I'm interesting, I met a brother there from England, and he was there just doing dhikr with the shaykh for I don't know how many months. That sometimes you do that as a clinic or a retreat. And of course, most people aren't going to stay there forever, are they? But that's what you would do. So the idea is that you learn this, so that each time you learn more and you build yourself, you go out in the world and you just got more fortitude. Yeah, you lose a bit. Just like in Ramadan, we're very good, and then after that, we lose a bit of it and we need another Ramadan. That's what the purpose of these khanqahs was. And it had them all over the world. They had them throughout the world. Just had to have a good shaykh. They all had different amounts of effect depending on how powerful the shaykh was and his system was. Some sheikhs were less rigid, were less strict, and some were very strict. So it depends on who you would get along with. That's what it was. That's how it all started. So Maulana Thanvi, I mean, if you want to understand, I mean, this book, he explains in the beginning, this whole first section of the book is, what is Tasawwuf? What is the need for it? And then he reduces, Tasawwuf essentially is struggle to free yourself from the distractions of the world and to focus on Allah. This does not mean giving up the world. You have many Sufis who are very wealthy. So it's not about giving up the world. It's just that you're not allowing the world to get into your heart. And you're just not obsessed by it, even though it's coming to you. If the world comes to you, you can't stop it. But you're just using it in the right way. And your focus is always Allah. Regardless of what's going on, your focus is always Allah. That's what you're constantly trying to do. So in here, he talks about the pledge. What's all this about the pledge then? You have to give yourself to someone or pledge to somebody. That the pledge idea comes from the Sunnah, because the Prophet ﷺ used to take pledge from people. He used to take, the first pledge was when people would become Muslim. So you take a pledge. So right now, we don't necessarily take pledge from you. We just make them read Shahada. But he would take a pledge that they were pledging something. There was pledge for jihad as well. And then there was pledge for tawbah, to revive a tawbah. And this is what Sheikh Abdul Qadir Jilani, the great Hanbali scholar of Baghdad, he kind of revived this. So then many people after him started getting people to take it. Why? He said that if people come to me and informally I'm teaching them, that's one thing. But if they sign a form that I am their teacher, then that's a bit more formalized, isn't it? So that's the same as taking the pledge. So I've taken a pledge with this guy. So I'm committed to you, you're committed to me. So it becomes a relationship and a responsibility in that sense. Then he discusses who is the right shaykh, and he gives a number of criteria. If you read that criteria, you'd hardly find somebody who meets all of that criteria, but you basically do with the best you get, because that's the kind of world we're living in, right? You do the best that you get. So that's the whole idea of it. And as I said, the simple thing is that yes, there's been some bad, and there are some bad sheep in the family here. And because of that, some people have just gone overboard and they're very loud. They're a minority, but they're very loud online. So every time you do a search for Tasawwuf, what are you going to find is criticisms of Tasawwuf. The people who were Sufis, they were in their khanqahs, it looks like, and not really worried about what anybody did. But now, mashallah, when you start searching online, you're going to find a lot more about Tasawwuf. There's still a lot more work to be done. So don't think of it as some kind of strange idea. It's a very, very organic idea. It's just about emphasizing the deen. That's all it is, as long as you find the right sheikh to do it with. And you must find a sheikh who is well-rounded. The best of the sheikhs are those who have studied the Quran and Sunnah in depth, who are ulama. Not to say that you can't have a sheikh who has not studied them in depth, as long as he understands them sufficiently well, because without that, there is no tasawwuf. Greatest of them, like Junaid al-Baghdadi and all these, rahimahullah, they said, if anything goes against the Sharia, you can call it tasawwuf, or whatever you want to call it, it won't be tasawwuf, because tasawwuf essentially is just the Quran and Sunnah and the fiqh in its full glory. That's what it is. So let me stop here, and let's see if there's any other questions.
Any questions? Well, some people criticize and say that Sufis are innovators.
Sufis are innovators. There's definitely some Sufis who are innovators. So let me start with that, right? So there are some Sufis, because remember, I said Sufism is dynamic, right? And what that means is that Sufis will innovate things to get you to become closer to Allah. So not all of their innovators are innovation. So they'll tell you that, look, I mean, depends on what you mean by innovation, right? So one innovation is that if I'm going to build a building, like the Prophet ﷺ had a sufa, ashab al-sufa, right? That's really where they take it from. That's this whole khanqah business is like Abu Hurairah, all that they were in the khanqah of Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Umar could only come every second day, right? One day his friend and one day himself. That's essentially what it is. But there are some who try to innovate ways that, look, I want to bring more people in. So I want to get sisters involved. So it's okay if I shake hands with sisters because they'll feel good that they're shaking the hands of the sheikh. That's a proper bad innovation, right? And then some, they say, okay, I found that if you jump up and down a bit, right, that really helps you to get connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then, so is that an innovation or not? So that's where the innovations come in, about the methodology. So some are bad innovations and some are not innovations at all, because they're just means of making the dhikr a bit more effective.
Yeah, sorry. I've got one thing. You said, by Tasawwuf, we get into a state wherein our heart is constantly in touch with Allah. It always does the zikr of Allah.
Always, not does zikr of Allah. Always, yes, always remembers it. Don't think of zikr as I'm always repeating Allah, Allah, Allah. That's not zikr. It's just remembrance of Allah, which means Allah's watching me. If I think that I'm doing dhikr, like Allah's watching me, what does Allah want me to do? And when I'm doing dua, I'm not saying Allah, 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 am I? I'm just saying, Ya Allah, that's a dhikr. It's just remembrance.
So perhaps we can say, from Mufti Abdurrahman, that it's the heart being mindful or conscious of Allah, not necessarily actually
Conscious.
doing.
So how to get into that state?
There's multiple ways. One is to learn more about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because the more you learn about him, the more you will know that he's around, he's there, and he's behind everything. To remember Allah's name. The reason they make us repeat La ilaha illallah or the other adhkar is to eventually get the heart used to that. The masnoon du'as that we have for everything, that's to remind us about Allah. Every time we change an activity, we start eating, we're supposed to remember Allah. We're doing dhikr there. When we finish, in the middle, if we forget, sleeping, etc., etc. So these are the multiple ways to remember Allah. And one of the most effective ways is to sit with somebody who's always remembering Allah, so that we can try to mirror that and learn from that and benefit from that, because humans learn from others more than anybody else.
Some examples are given from the nature of the Mars and how they do it. Example from the life of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Man of Sahaba radiallahu anhum, how they used to do it. Like on a
How they used to do what?
and the Tasawwuf, like after Fajr or something.
So the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, all the hadith there that he used to do istighfar 70 times a day or 100 times a day. When he saw his wife, Juwayriya radiallahu anha, I think he came back from Fajr, or he went and she was doing some dhikr, and then he came back and she was doing some dhikr, and then he said, look, I'll read this instead. So you can tell that they used to use, they used to be engaged in all of this. The Prophet ﷺ himself, between Fajr and sunrise, when he used to sit and mention the number of adhkar that you sit, whoever sits there for that long, and then you get up and you do the 2 rakats of the ishraq, right? That's essentially what they do. It's the same kind of thing. After Maghrib, you read this many rakats, the Tahajjud, you do this many rakats. That's Tasawwuf. That's essentially what Tasawwuf is.
I mean, remember, if it's the actions of the heart, it's trying to internalize the outward teachings of Islam. So it's prayer, it's fasting, it's buying and selling, it's marriage or divorce, as the case may be. But there's an inner dimension to it, where the heart is mindful of Allah, where the heart wants to be closer to Allah. And so it's the inward with the out. And the inward thing we normally refer to as the soul, the amalul qalb, the actions of the heart, as opposed to amalul jawarih, the actions of the external limbs, which we normally call fiqh. That's what it is. So a person who's praying, for example, and trying to make their prayer more inwardly meaningful, they're already doing tasawwuf, whether they call it that or not. A person who, let's go even a bit more basic than that. A person who's trying to buy and sell, a person who is buying and selling, but they're aware that I need to do it in a way that is pleasing to Allah and not displeasing to Allah. In one sense, their buying and selling has been seasoned with tasawwuf, because they're mindful of the pleasure or the displeasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in that sense, most of us are probably doing some tasawwuf, without actually realizing it, except that tasawwuf became a science that formulated and fleshed out the ways and ideas to do this in a more constructed, organized manner. Otherwise, any act of a Sahabi generally, the act, it's an act that involved outward obedience to Allah coming from an inward heart that was in love, in fear, in awe, in connection to God.
So Sufis always talk about states as well, that when you do some dhikr in a certain way, you will feel very elated, like almost like very highly inspired and spiritually inspired. So you have that hadith from Hanzala radiallahu anhu, when he used to feel like that with the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's in the khanqa and he feels like that. He goes outside and he doesn't feel like that anymore. So he thinks he's munafiq.
Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu felt the same way. That's what a khanqa is supposed to do. And with the Prophet ﷺ, it's automatic. You stay with him for 5 minutes. And that was the experience that you got.
But to make the connection, it's Sheikh Abdurrahman is not saying the khanqa itself, it's the people or person, as the case may be, in there. Because we believe that people's outward states can really affect us. Okay, we know this from 2 or 3 ways. We know this from the text of the Quran and Sunnah. So, for example, in the Sahih Hadith, the Prophet said, the ayn, the evil eye, is haqq. It's true. People get affected negatively just by the way some people jealously can look at them. Okay, but out of Allah's mercy, we know the opposite of that is true as well. That the good eye can have an effect. I mean, it has to be a really strong, pious, good eye. And Al-Hasan al-Basri, authentically related, some of the other younger tabi'in used to say that no sooner would we gaze upon Al-Hasan al-Basri that our iman would be elevated. Because some people have that effect. And that's why the Prophet talks about there are certain people when you see them, as Dr. Salim mentioned, when you see them, they remind you of God, of Allah. Because there is an inward reality that Allah establishes in their hearts that manifests itself as an outward nur. When we're close to them, something can, and more often than not, does rub off. Then when we're out of their presence, away from the khanqa, it's going to wear off because the dunya will have its own taste and smell. So let's just think of Tasawwuf as the interiorization of Islam. I want to pray a prayer that is excellent in terms of its fiqh rules. Okay? And therefore I should know my basic fiqh rules of prayer and maybe revise them every year. Okay, just basically. So that there's perfection or excellence in how I outwardly do things. And then the rest of my life is working on the inner perfection of the heart, so that inwardly I can pray a prayer that is meaningful and has khushu and reverence of Allah Jalla Jalaluhu.
Exactly. We just break for Azan and maybe after prayer we come back inside of the
Break for Azan.
And then either we could do a question and then after Isha we can continue. Is that okay? Because Isha time people might be coming. Exactly. So Adhan, prayer and the after prayer. Let's just join after.